Hi, dear language learners. Today, let's talk about what I call a misunderstanding about outdated language learning methods. There seems to be a huge confusion at the moment about what it means when we say outdated language learning methods, especially in the context of AI. So artificial intelligence is now moving into our lives, and this is, as always, a new tool. It's not the content itself, it's how we do things. So let me give you examples. I've heard recently some of my students saying books anyway are better than AI. Or on the other hand, modern language learning has to be with AI and outdated language learning is with books. So this is what is absolutely has nothing to do with outdated language learning methods, because it is like saying cars are better than planes to move forward. Well, both are ways to move forward. It just depends on what you want to do. I mean, in some contexts, cars are better. In some contexts, planes are better. Are you going to go with a car to the other continent? No. So what we need to not confuse is the format or the communication canal in which we communicate stuff. So in this way, AI or books, they are just the format, but the content and the way in which you study a language, that is actually what has to be in a brain-friendly, modern way that takes into account you as a human being. Alex, and as always, we meet here on this channel, and thank you very much for joining me again today for another 10 minutes of sharing really useful mindset hacks to get you speaking with unshakable confidence. Now, what is so important about when we talk about avoiding outdated language learning methods? It is the way in which we study. So what do we focus on? I've said that in my previous videos, and those of you who have joined me since a longer time will know that, and please drop me a comment how this resonates with you. I mean, some decades ago, and this is something I have experienced in my school system when I learned English, the focus was very much on being perfectionist at grammar. The better you were at grammar rules and applying them, the more you could say, I'm good at the language. But if our objective is speaking fluently and having a meaningful conversation, this cannot be the measurement, right? This is not the criteria, because grammar is the system of how our language works. And yes, we need to know grammar, but it needs to serve us to do what? To communicate, to have meaningful conversations, to actually engage, to understand the language and to engage, to have meaningful conversations. That is so important. So the focus of outdated methods, it's not saying they are bad, by the way. It's just saying they are from other times when, well, the research was not so developed that people would say, oh yes, I need to combine actually the way in which we study to the way in which our brains are wired to memorize. So this brain friendliness of studying and learning was not as developed yet. The collective consciousness was not developed that this is actually something that goes together. So if I study in such a way that I force myself to just become the best at certain grammar rules, well, I will be the best at the grammar rule, but I will not be able to speak. So we always need to remind ourselves, what is the objective in learning a language? It is to engage in a meaningful conversation and to understand and to reply. If this is in written format, in spoken format, in reading, and in making your mind up about something that you've just read, that doesn't matter, but it is really about meaningful engagement. It is like a child. A child in the first 2 years of coming to life is actually learning the language as a tool to be able to live and to start experiencing life. And for that, you need to be able to engage with other human beings. So the language is actually not, and that is an outdated belief. It's not something that is hard work in terms of getting the grammar right. You need to know the grammar, but it's not about perfectionism. Of course, it doesn't matter if you sometimes mix up the future tense with the conditional tense. People will correct you and then you will remember. You can already speak far earlier than knowing a grammar rule. You can engage in simple sentences that you memorize and that become automated in, for example, greeting situations, in presentation situations. It doesn't have to be the number one aspect actually of speaking. It's not the grammar. It's a method, or it's a tool that you use to understand the system of the language, but only if it enables you to speak. So the order of how important, how much we prioritize the grammar, that is the important thing. And this was very outdated back then because we used to think that grammar is number one priority. No, if we look at how children learn their native language, grammar is not number one priority. It comes last. It serves whenever the child says something wrong, the father or the mother will explain, no, it's said like that. And then later at school, this will be having a name of, that was the past tense. But the child can already speak far before that, before knowing the grammar rule, the child will already be able to speak the language. So that is the important thing. So outdated is what we focus on. Do we focus on being perfectionist as grammar? Then that is outdated. But it doesn't have to do, you can be focusing on the wrong thing with books or with AI. If you use AI to actually just become the best conjugator of Spanish verbs, well, you will be using an outdated method even with AI. AI is just the format. You can read 10 grammar books over the weekend and you will be using books for an outdated method. So the language learning method is not the format, it's how you actually study in a brain-friendly way. And talking about brain-friendly, that's the second point I want to make. It's so important to be in that modern consciousness of knowing how we are wired. It's so important because otherwise, what will happen, and I guess most of you have experienced this at least once, it's overwhelm. You will feel overwhelmed by the wealth of things you can study in a language. And then what will happen, and this is also a very normal psychological and social psychological process, you will procrastinate because you don't feel like doing all that because it seems like this huge mountain. So this is where the everyday nano method comes in. It doesn't matter if you use books or AI or any other channel or communication channel or format, you need to divide the big mountain up into small chunks so that your brain gets exactly what it needs for everyday life, and that your brain is able to say, oh, that's just that little tiny bit I need to remember. Okay, I can do that today. That is something that fits in my daily routine. And then in that sense, you create for your brain an anti-procrastination technique because your brain will always start next day again with the 5 minutes per day because it will think it's not that hard. It's actually very easy. And yesterday I enjoyed saying that Italian sentence and I got that response. So you actually study in a brain-friendly modern way when you do what your brain is wired to do with a language, when you actually focus on this natural process of engaging, of having meaningful also feelings in the new language. And when you start that lovely process of creating your new identity in the language, that is what we mean by modern ways of learning a language. And also the third point is this thing of joy. There used to be, and that's very outdated, this kind of belief, if you study something new, it needs to be very serious. It's something, going back to the perfectionism about grammar, it's something that needs to be studied in a hard and serious way. I remember that from the 80s when I was at school. It was always in the language class, nobody was laughing. There was no joy. It was just translation, focusing on grammar rules, and it was hard study. reciting vocabulary. And I kind of, for my second language I learned, so that was English, I was about to actually not like it, And once you start when you study in an outdated way, once you start to have that return on investment from it, that you don't like something, this is definitely an indicator that your study method is wrong and outdated, that it doesn't serve you, because you will just feel being put off, and that is not what life should be about, especially not if you are studying your new target language in a as a passion, as something you do for your free time, something that you don't even do for your job or because you have to, because you want to. So anything we choose to learn should be something that we enjoy. By that, I don't mean that we laugh all the time, by the way. I mean that we should enjoy the process. Even the hard times when we mix up two words for the 10th time, enjoy that. That's the normal process, but it's not something that should feel something like very hard work, very serious, it's very, something very heavy. That is not what it should be feeling. I mean, for me as well, as a polyglot, any next language I'm learning, I want to enjoy the process, because this is what life is about. There's no final stage of when we have studied all the grammar that we then finally are allowed to speak because we're perfect. It doesn't exist. So I think that this whole debate about what is better, books or AI, is not really what we're talking about here. It's the way in which we study the how to, not the what we use, not the format we use in terms of the language. I can do my 5 minutes per day fantastically with a book. I can do it with AI. I can use podcasts. I can use television series. And that's also very traditional format. It doesn't have to do with the format. So let's all, and that's my, how can I call that? That's my suggestion. Let's all stop with comparing different formats. Let's focus on the actual what we're studying. It's the content. It's the language, and that should be at the center of it. So thanks as always for joining me today, spending that time with me, and see you in the next video.